December 27th, 2020. The Jacksonville Jaguars are playing the Chicago Bears. There's 8 seconds left in the first half, and Chicago has the ball. Teams tend to spend the first half simply just trying to get any points they can, so Jacksonville has to keep them from even kicking a field goal. So, why is this the defense Jacksonville ran with? The Bears can easily get the yards they need to kick a field goal to end the half, which is what they did. The Jaguars were doing this thing called tanking, where you lose on purpose because you think it benefits you to. In their case, they were trying to get the number 1 overall draft pick so they can get Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Some cases of tanking are more extreme than others, but at the very least, you're intentionally not putting yourself in the best chances to win. This is an extremely controversial and polarizing idea that spans every sport. Sports fans generally know tanking when they see it, and the most famous times a team has tried it, but they don't usually know its history. What we're going to do today is rewind the timeline of tanking and highlight some instances where you can point to a team and say, they were probably tanking, and take one lesson about tanking from each story. Because this is a really complex yet inexact science. So we're going to pick out a few examples of teams doing this over the years to highlight important tanking concepts. And we're going to trace tanking back to the earliest instance we can find to eventually see who invented tanking in sports. Give us some time though. These lessons are important for the journey and for the first ever example when we get there. But first, let's establish why tanking exists in the first place. Players and coaches themselves almost never ever tank. Play the clip from my Jets video back. There's always 2 obstacles to the idea of sports teams losing on purpose: the players and the coaches. Players and coaches don't want to lose. Winning helps them stay around in the game and keep having jobs. But, organizationally, a team might decide at the top of their food chain that short-term losing is in their best interest. There are times when teams recognize they're probably not going to compete for a championship as they're currently constructed and want to get younger, usually through trade or the draft. This can be perfectly reasonable, but there's a difference between rebuilding and tanking. When a team rebuilds, they're still hoping for on-field winning pretty soon, and they usually let the process play itself out naturally. Tanking eliminates both of those things. There's a difference between being patient / looking to start over and losing on purpose because you think it helps you. And while we're on that topic, there's also a difference between tanking and just being a bad team. This isn't going to be a list of every team that has ever tanked, but the ones you're about to see are the best representations of it. Describing tanking can be a little complicated, so why don't we start rewinding a little and I can show you what it looks like and what we can learn from it along the way. And yes, like the title promises, we'll trace tanking back to the earliest instance we could find to more or less figure out who started it, to the best of our knowledge. Let's start our journey with the 2018-19 New York Knicks, who it definitely seemed like were tanking. The Knicks' best player was a 22-year-old star in the making named Kristaps Porzingis, but he was hurt for all of this season. Their top scorer for the year was Tim Hardaway Jr., who was putting up a solid 19.1 points per game. In January of that season, both were traded to Dallas. Their next best scorer was Enes Kanter, who at one point in the year rattled off 5 straight double-doubles. And Kanter was so open about his love for New York that he kissed the court at Madison Square Garden during his final game. His final game was February of that season, a little after the Knicks just kinda stopped using him for a little while, their second best scoring option. He eventually got waived, and that left Emmanuel Mudiay as the team's new best scorer. This was all during a stretch where the Knicks lost 18 straight games, by the way. That same month where Kanter was waived, the New York Daily News published an article about how NBA Commissioner Adam Silver called tanking corrosive and was sick of teams doing it. What was their motivation for doing this? 2 things. They got rid of their 2 best players in that trade to Dallas to bring in 30-year-old DeAndre Jordan. Jordan was very good friends with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who were set to hit the open market as free agents that summer. It was thought that Jordan wanted to team up with KD and Kyrie that next year, and the Knicks wanted to sacrifice immediate winning to eventually get the benefits of Jordan bringing his buddies to New York. And that's exactly what happened, just not with the Knicks, with the other basketball team in New York. They also looked to get as high a draft pick as possible in the very next draft to bring in one of the biggest college basketball prospects ever, Fortnite player Zion Williamson. They did not get the number 1 pick in the draft lottery. What's important about this? Our first lesson about tanking. It doesn't always work. Hey, remember when the Philadelphia 76ers were like really bad? When Sam Hinkie took over as the Sixers GM, he traded the team's only all-star on the night of his first draft. Then he picked a guy who ended up winning Rookie of the Year, and then traded him away the next year. They didn't even trade him for like a big-time player either.
It's not that the players were purposely losing, it's that Hinkie orchestrated a roster that made sure they couldn't win.
They were probably the most openly tanking team ever, as it seemed the front office and the players kind of embraced what was going on. I'm not gonna say it.
Say the line!
Trust the process. The Sixers in the Sam Hinkie era were awful, by design. Before Hinkie resigned in 2016, their peak was a 28-game losing streak that included the first 18 games of his final season. The process got Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons to Philadelphia, 2 great players leading the charge for a championship push over 5 years after Hinkie's resignation. So his vision might have been onto something. But what's the lesson this time? Tanking is often done to land draft pieces, but you still need to draft good players with those picks. While Hinkie was the GM, the 76ers drafting had more misses than hits. Sure, they got Embiid, but Hinkie also brought in first-round draft picks Nerlens Noel, Jalil Okafor, Dario Saric, and Michael Carter-Williams on draft night, none of whom ended up playing close to their expectations. So even if the Sixers brought in Simmons and Embiid, they still missed more than they hit in the draft. Don't even get Sixers fans started on Markelle Fultz either. Now let's double up here for a 2-for-1 example. From 2011 to 2014, the Houston Astros lost 106 games or more 3 times. They also traded away their best players in Hunter Pence, Michael Bourne, and Carlos Lee, all of whom were still performing fairly well at the time of their trades. In 2013, their payroll was just over $22 million, and they lost 111 games. Their whole team was paid about as much as Tim Lincecum was paid that year. They were simply not trying to put a quality team on the field. This was a franchise that had 1 World Series appearance in their first 55 seasons. So the rest of the league was probably looking at them, seeing them build a team like,
"You know nothing about that!"
But then, at about the time 2012 number 1 overall draft pick Carlos Correa was ready to reach the major leagues, things turned around. Like it or not, they did win the 2017 World Series, and went back in 2019. This video is not about their less than honorable tactics in getting there though. It's about what they did before all that for a few years. Similarly, the early 2010s Cubs tanked. They traded just about all of their good veteran players, including Carlos Zambrano, Jeff Samardzija, Matt Garza, Scott Feldman, and Andrew Kashner. And they literally released their 2012 All-Star Brian LaHair right after the season ended, which is, not common. From 2013 to 2014, their payroll dropped from 14th to 23rd in MLB, and their best season from 2012 to 2014 was a 71-91 record. During this period, they drafted Chris Bryant number 2 overall and acquired Anthony Rizzo, Jake Arrieta, and Addison Russell in trades, all of whom became all-stars within 3 to 4 seasons of joining the organization. And then once they saw some promise in that core, that's when they invested in big free agent deals like John Lester, Ben Zobrist, and Jason Hayward. As you might know, all this was geared towards a push at the team's first World Series win in 108 years. They coasted through the season to get there, then they went down 3-1 in the World Series. Naturally, that led people to count them and their efforts over the previous few years out. And the Cubs just said,
"You're stupid. You're the dumbest guy on this planet trying to call me out." This is going to be a tough play. The Cubs win the World Series!
What's the lesson here? The total opposite of the first lesson. Sometimes, tanking can actually kinda work. It tricks other teams into thinking it's an easy way for future success. And that possibility fuels copycats. Are you ready for one of the wildest tanking examples we have here that lasted just 1 game? We're moving into Italian soccer in 2010 for this one. Lazio is a bad team at this time, and Roma is a good team. Both are rivals that play in the same city, share a stadium, and hate each other. It is believed that Lazio intentionally lost a game to Inter Milan so that Roma could not win the league. There's an incredible article in The Guardian about this game that we'll link in the description about how Roma just ripped both teams and their fans for this. And it talks all about how the fans for both teams wanted Inter to win the game. It also highlighted how the energy surrounding Lazio and Inter Milan in the past was that of mutual respect. So it appears that Lazio, who had no motivation left on the season, was just going to let Inter win so that they could clinch being the champions, not Roma. "If you win, we'll beat you up," was apparently the fan slogan of the day from Lazio fans.
We're kind of here to beat you up.
And by every indication, Lazio didn't even really try. The article called Lazio's performance that day, quote, "one of the weakest displays of Lazio's miserable season." Inter beat Roma in the standings by 2 points. What this tells us is that sometimes tanking can be really spiteful and petty, usually in smaller doses. This is not the only time we've ever seen a team play bad on purpose to be petty. In the last game of the 2020 NFL season, the Philadelphia Eagles were down by 3 to the Washington football team with just over 12 minutes left in the game. The Eagles had Jalen Hurts, who was a good young quarterback playing well, and you'd think they'd try to lead a comeback through him, but the Eagles pulled him for their backup quarterback who sucked that game. The Eagles lost, and they moved up 3 spots in their draft position, but they also conveniently knocked their rival Giants out of the playoff picture by letting Washington win. That automatically sent their rival Giants home. And the Giants noticed this, and all the way back in 1962, a Spanish basketball team lost to an Italian basketball team because they scored a basket in their own net on purpose to end the game and lose by 2. Because they were afraid of letting the game go to overtime and letting the Italian team blow them out. This was actually considered a genius strategic move for point differential purposes, and doing this became against the rules immediately after. Again, what all of these have in common was losing pretty much on purpose because they saw a benefit in it. The last couple were more for petty reasons, but they still see it as a benefit anyway. We're almost as far back as we can go here. These next 2 stories are connected. They're probably the 2 biggest tanking success stories ever, and they happen within about 10 days of each other. Hakeem Olajuwon was dominating at the University of Houston and kinda wanted to stay in Houston to play for the NBA's Houston Rockets. So while the Rockets had a great young big man on their team already, they made a mad dash to get good enough draft position to get Hakeem. In those days, there was no draft lottery. There was a coin flip between the worst and second worst team for the number 1 draft spot. So to get a chance at that coin flip, the Rockets, who started 24-36 through their first 60 games, miraculously won just 5 of their last 21 to be bad enough to get that coin flip. It worked. They got Hakeem and later won 2 championships around his Hall of Fame talent. There's a great story we found that the Rockets had a 38-year-old player named Elvin Hayes on their team who registered just 4 starts in that season with the Rockets. 2 of them were in the last 2 games of the year, where he played all 53 minutes in the first and 35 in the second. They said it was to get his career minutes total to exactly 50,000 on the dot, for some reason. But in that final 21-game stretch, one of the teams they lost to was the Utah Jazz. The Jazz coach outright said they were losing on purpose. Considering he saw them up close and as a former NBA Coach of the Year, his judgment holds weight here. At the same time in 1984, the Pittsburgh Penguins tanked, pretty openly. They had been to the playoffs 4 of the last 5 years with good players on their team, but decided to go for one of hockey's biggest prospects ever in Mario Lemieux. Problem was, the New Jersey Devils were doing the same thing. They raced to the bottom, Pittsburgh won, drafted Lemieux, and long story short, he now literally owns the team. Wonder if that worked out. There are 2 really good articles about this saga on hockeygraphs.com with a ton of data showing how these tanks played out that explain the story way better than I can. So those are linked in the description if you'd like to know more. What these 2 tanks had in common was that both teams went after a specific guy. And that leads into a big lesson about tanking. Tanking is driven by circumstances. Most commonly, this means teams see an opportunity to go after a specific guy in the draft, or more simply, the opportunity to lose for some kind of benefit there. Teams don't tank for fun. They tank because they have some actual tangible goal with it. The Rockets tanked for Hakeem, the Penguins tanked for Lemieux, the Jaguars tanked for Lawrence. Olajuwon and Lemieux are human representations of those goals, and they worked perfectly. Guess what, guys? We are finally here. The earliest example of tanking we can find, and this story shows every lesson we've covered today in one. And you want to know something crazy? The inventor of tanking is not a team. It's just a dude. Boxer Jake LaMotta. You might have seen a true story about him, a movie called Raging Bull. I feel compelled to show you this part of Raging Bull where they just zoom in on a mug handle for what looks like no reason. I didn't edit that clip. That's how it is in the movie. But back to how Jake LaMotta might have invented tanking. November 14th, 1947. Jake LaMotta is fighting Billy Fox. He admitted he lost this fight on purpose. He did this for a pretty big reason. A guaranteed chance at a title fight. He literally paid the Mafia to do this too. It's not like he was throwing a fight for money. It was the exact opposite. Jake LaMotta lost on purpose for a long-term chance at a championship. That's pretty much tanking in a nutshell. The circumstances were there, he saw the right guy to go after. The path he took was kinda taking the easy way out to spite a system he didn't think was giving him a good chance naturally. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing along the way, as he did lose a fight and had to wait well over a year for his shot, but he ended up winning his championship. Basically everything we've analyzed about tanking is in that story, and it's the earliest sports example we could find of a sports person losing to increase their chances at a championship, not losing on purpose for something like money. He held the title he tanked for just one more fight. Tanking is an extremely complicated subject. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. As the journey we went on shows, there are a lot of things that go into it and come out of it. Losing on purpose is usually not fun for those who love and support you, so it's naturally very controversial, and it can lead into a whole nother debate about if you're mistreating your players or your fans by doing this. But we bet you didn't know that it might have first been done in a movie by Robert De Niro. Still not over this mug handle, by the way.